Okay, so we're going to review the lymphatic system and the immune system, the things that we've talked about so far, which include the lymphatic system here. We talked about lymph nodes, lymphatics, which means lymph vessels, and other lymphoid tissues. And then we also talked about the immune system. And we talked about the overall immune response and how we have two different branches of our immune system. We have the innate and the adaptive. So let's first talk about the lymphatic vessels and nodes. So the purpose of the lymphatic vessels are to create this drainage system to return lymph, which is fluid leaked from the cardiovascular system, back to the cardiovascular system. But the lymphatic vessels don't just return the fluid, but they clean it along the way. And who's responsible for that? But the lymph nodes. And we talked about how we have an aggregate of lymph nodes in 3 different areas of the body, in the neck, in the armpit, and the groin region. But you do have lymph nodes spread out all over the place. We have different types of lymphatic vessels. The lymphatic capillaries weave in between the cardiovascular capillaries, and they're very low pressure, they're very porous, and they pick up that 3 liters of fluid that's lost per day in the capillary spaces and return that fluid through the milking action of the skeletal muscles back to the cardiovascular system. And that lymph takes some detours at the site of the lymph nodes. And we have a series of vessels here, which are the afferent vessels. There are a number of afferent vessels that feed into the lymph node. The outer portion of our lymph node, which is here, is the cortex. And we talked about how B and T lymphocytes are primarily in those areas. And then in the medulla portion, which is right here, we talked about how macrophages are located there. So that lymph is going to sit in that lymph node and come into contact with immune cells. And if there are any bad guys, they're going to be hopefully recognized and taken care of. And then we have one vessel with lymph coming out this way, and that is the efferent lymphatic vessel. And then we have our other lymphoid organs. And they include the tonsils, which are located in your naso and oral pharynx. Peyer's patches, which are like tonsils of the small intestines. The appendix, which at this point is a vestigial structure that hangs off the large intestine. There's the spleen, which has a number of functions. It is a site for immune cells to hang out. It's a reservoir for blood. Platelets are actually stored there as well. A big thing that the spleen does also is that it looks for dead and dying red blood cells and recycles those and sends the products to the liver for further processing. And then we have the thymus, which we talked about is the site of T cell maturation. The tonsils, the Peyer's patches, and the appendix together are called this thing, which is MALT. It sounds like it has a superpower, and that is mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. We then moved on to talk about our different body defenses and our immune system. We talked about how we have this arsenal of cells and structures within our body that are there to fight off foreign invaders from getting into our body and causing problems. We have a first, second, and third line of troops that are ready to fight off or prevent things from getting inside of our body. So our first line of defense, which is part of the innate defenses, which we are born with, is our skin and mucosa. and the different secretions and or specializations that are associated with the skin and mucosa. The skin has an acid mantle. It's keratinized. Mucosal linings are in areas of the body that are exposed to the outside, so the respiratory, reproductive, digestive, and urinary tracts. The fluid that is secreted in mucus, there's lysozyme and antimicrobial agents. There's things like in the vagina and the stomach, there's an acid that is produced to kill bacteria. There's cilia and hairs that are also located in the mucosa that will trap pathogens or foreign materials and try to get rid of them. We then have our second line of defenses that are also part of our innate immune system. So if the skin and the mucosal membranes are breached, then we have other stuff that will come in to help. We have different types of cells. We have phagocytic cells, which are neutrophils and monocytes. Neutrophils are the first ones on the scene. They'll phagocytize and die. Monocytes turn into super duper hungry hippos, and they come in and kind of clean up the mess. We have NK cells, or natural killer cells. They are nonspecific T lymphocytes that can recognize either virus-infected or cancer-infected cells and secrete an enzyme called perforin that will cause these cells to lyse and die. We then have the inflammatory response, which is a localized response. When we have tissue damage or a localized infection, inflammation can occur. And there are those cardinal signs of inflammation, which is redness, swelling, heat, and pain. And what causes those, when the tissue cells are damaged, they secrete histamine and kinins, which causes vasodilation. The cells also secrete chemicals that call out to immune cells, so white blood cells to rush to the area, like neutrophils and monocytes to help clean up bad guys. The increased blood flow is going to give you the redness and the heat. The heat is a good thing because it's going to increase the rate of metabolic activity localized in that area. The swelling is caused from the white blood cells accumulating in the area. And then our fourth sign, which is pain, is telling you to leave that area alone. Another thing that we have is fever. And when we have invaders in our body, our white blood cells, once they recognize them, will secrete things called pyrogens. Pyrogens are then picked up basically by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus says, okay, I have to systemically turn up the temperature to increase the metabolic rate so that we can crank out immune cells to help deal with this bad guy. And then I missed one thing down here, and that is antimicrobial proteins. And that includes complement. So complement is 20 different proteins that are located in our blood plasma that will fixate on foreign invaders. And they can pull them out of solution and make it easier for other immune cells to take care of them. They can also create what's called a membrane attack complex and basically poke holes in cells and cause those cells to lyse. And then we have interferon. Interferon is secreted by virus-infected cells. It's a protein that will be exocytosed, and it will bind on to neighboring cells' plasma membranes and basically tell those cells, hey, there's a virus on the loose, increase your forces, so that those cells hopefully will not be infected by that virus, but that virus-infected cell is going to die. And then we have our adaptive immune system, which is our third line of defense. And what's included there are lymphocytes, our B and T lymphocytes. Our B lymphocytes are going to be responsible for making antibodies. And then our T lymphocytes, which accompanied by macrophages and other APCs, which are antigen-presenting cells, are going to mount direct cell attacks on foreign invaders. So just a quick recap of the things that are associated with the innate immune system. I've talked about what are the characteristics of the innate immune system. So it is the Lady Gaga branch of our immune response. We are born with these things. All the things associated with the innate immune system are non-specific, so they fight anybody and everybody, and they are the front line. They will be the first things to go and try to take care of or attack any foreign particles or antigenic substances that are in the body. And as I just talked about before, here are the things that are associated with the innate immune system, and you should be able to explain all of these things. So the skin and mucosa, cells are different types of nonspecific cells, which are phagocytes, neutrophils, and monocytes, natural killer cells, inflammation and the process of inflammation, the signs of inflammation, antimicrobial proteins, which include complement and interferon, and fever. We then have the adaptive branch of the immune system, and the characteristics of that are that it is antigen specific. So it has specific targets that it is going to snipe out and deal with. It is systemic, meaning that it's going to be working all throughout the body. And advantage, even though it might be a little slower to start, is that the adaptive immune system creates immunological memory. And we have these memory cells that are stored up in our body that help us fight off an infection agent. After we met it once, we will then have a stronger immune response and a quicker immune response every subsequent time that we come into contact with that bad guy. And then there are two different branches to the adaptive immune system. We have the humoral branch, which is dealing with B cells and antibodies. And then we have the cellular mediated branch, which is dealing with T cells. And there's a difference with B cells and T cells. We call them B cells and T cells because of the area with which they become immunocompetent. B lymphocytes or B cells become immunocompetent in the bone marrow. T cells become immunocompetent in the thymus. Hence we get the B for bone marrow and T for thymus. B lymphocytes have tons of receptors on the outside of their plasma membrane, which you could think of like keys. And they're just waiting to find a germ that meets or that fits one of the keys that are on the outside of their membrane. And once there's that specific kind of lock and key fit, then that B lymphocyte is going to become totally primed at fighting that one antigen or that one germ for the rest of their life. T cells, however, they cannot go out and directly recognize bad guys. They actually have to have bad guys or, antigenic material presented to them. And the cells that present antigens to T lymphocytes are called APCs, or antigen presenting cells. And we have a couple different types of antigen presenting cells. We have macrophages, like monocytes, dendritic cells, which also do phagocytosis, and B cells can actually be antigen presenters. I'm going to talk more about that later. So the purpose of this was really just to recap the things we've talked about thus far. I'm going to produce another video in just a few minutes that talks more specifically about the adaptive immune system and what I would like you to know for the test about the humoral response and the cell-mediated response.